Total Extinction, Future Without Suffering. A note to our readers. This book touches on sensitive subjects that might evoke strong emotions for some readers. Introduction. Imagine a world where suffering, in all its forms, ceases to exist, not just for humans, but for every sentient being. In this book, we explore the concept of total extinction as a solution to end suffering. This book addresses a profound moral dilemma: the value placed on life and experiences weighed against the desire to spare beings from anguish. Acknowledging the complexities, we confront the moral landscapes with universal consequences. In these pages, the ethical question of deliberately choosing extinction to end collective suffering will be examined, invoking a reflection on our moral responsibility to all sentient beings. We question norms that prioritize life preservation, engaging in a dialogue about the responsibility to prevent the perpetuation of suffering, even if it means contemplating the end of all life. This book is not a call for action, but an invitation to question and imagine, boldly and empathetically, a future free from suffering. Join us as we explore the ethical dilemmas and philosophical inquiries surrounding the concept of total extinction. Clarifications. For our discussion, knowledge, assumptions, and understanding about the world and universe are based on science and reason. Total extinction, as used in this book, means extinction of all species living on Earth. This book addresses the inevitable suffering of sentient beings who will come into existence in the future unless we prevent it. While the aspiration to alleviate the sufferings of beings that are currently alive is commendable, it is beyond the scope of this book. The ideas of this book are not intended to blame, shame, accuse, or judge anyone for their actions or choices. The aim is to reduce and ultimately end pain and suffering, not to increase suffering for anyone. Questions that we will explore include: is it ethically justifiable to bring sentient beings into existence? Does the potential for suffering justify depriving future beings of their lives and experiences? Can animals feel pain? Are animals conscious? Are they just reacting to stimuli? Question of moral rights to choose for other species that cannot communicate with humans. Are there better or more agreeable alternatives to extinction? Chapter 1. The Problem of Suffering. The current International Association for the Study of Pain, IASP, defines pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with, or resembling that associated with, actual or potential tissue damage. Pain, nociception, and negative feelings serve as crucial evolutionary adaptations that enhance the survival and reproductive success of organisms. The sensation of pain, often associated with harmful stimuli, acts as a protective mechanism, prompting organisms to avoid potentially harmful or life-threatening situations. Nociception, the physiological response to harmful stimuli, further amplifies this defense mechanism by facilitating swift and appropriate reactions to potential threats. Negative feelings, such as fear and distress, act as motivational signals, compelling organisms to prioritize their safety and well-being. Collectively, these experiences contribute to the fitness and resilience of species, ensuring that individuals can navigate their environments, evade dangers, and successfully reproduce, thereby passing on these adaptive traits to future generations. Suffering is the state or experience of physical, emotional, or psychological pain or distress. Contemplating the total amount of suffering can be a humbling experience. Evolution is driven by survival and adaptation, processes that are inherently linked to pain and struggle. In this sense, suffering is deeply embedded in the very fabric of conscious existence, almost as if it is a cost of being alive. In this chapter, we will take a closer look into the pain and suffering of humans and animals. We will review evidence for animal sentience and the universality of suffering. If you agree with the overarching suffering of most living beings and animals being conscious, you may skip this chapter. Reading with empathy. What factors influence our ability to extend empathy toward others outside of our community? How much first-hand knowledge do we typically have about those from communities different from our own? And how does our knowledge affect empathy and concern for others' well-being? Empathy is understanding and sharing the feelings of another being. It involves recognizing someone else's emotions and putting yourself in their situation to feel what they might be experiencing. Several factors affect empathy, including genetic predisposition, hormones, oxytocin, mirror neurons, exposure or direct experiences, cultural and social norms, geographic and social distance, familiarity, identifiable victim effect. First-hand knowledge of communities outside our own often comes from personal experiences, such as travel, interactions, and friendships. Engaging with different cultures and perspectives facilitates broader awareness of their unique challenges. Conversely, knowledge based on media portrayals, social narratives, and prevailing stereotypes can lead to a superficial understanding of the issues faced by others, diminishing our ability to empathize with their suffering. When we fail to see the faces behind statistics or headlines, it becomes easier to dismiss their suffering as distant or irrelevant. Empathy helps readers to bridge distances, cultural, temporal, and emotional, and perceive the world from perspectives vastly different from their own. In this book, we will discuss sufferings experienced by humans and animals. As you read, please try to place yourself in their position and see if you can relate to the sufferings of the individuals behind large numbers like millions or billions. Human suffering. Death. 55 million people died in 2019, with 88% of the deaths caused by disease. Most of these individuals experience severe and often untreated pain in their final years. Around 80% of the world population has either no or insufficient access to treatment for moderate to severe pain. Age-associated health conditions, such as heart disease, cancer, respiratory illnesses, and diabetes, remain the primary contributors to mortality across the globe. According to the World Health Organization, these non-communicable diseases account for 74% of all global deaths. In their later years, most older adults live through chronic diseases, physical disabilities, and mental health challenges, often without adequate support or care. Painless assisted death is permitted in only a few countries and is strictly limited to those who are terminally ill, leaving countless others to face prolonged suffering. Suicide. More than 700,000 people commit suicide every year. There are 4 to 25 more failed attempts against each suicide. Behind these stark figures lies a haunting narrative of human suffering, unbearable pain and desperation that compels individuals to override their innate survival instinct. Hunger and famine. According to the World Health Organization, around 45 million children under the age of 5 were facing wasting, the gravest form of malnutrition. Additionally, 149 million children in the same age group were experiencing stunted growth and development, a consequence of chronic insufficient intake of essential nutrients. The same WHO report highlights alarming global statistics. In 2021, over 2 billion people worldwide experienced moderate or severe food insecurity. The 2024 Global Report on Food Crisis, GRFC, found that in 2023, more than 281 million people across 59 countries and territories experienced severe levels of acute food insecurity. Famine is extreme scarcity of food affecting a large population, leading to widespread hunger, malnutrition, and death. It affects people not just physically but psychologically, socially, morally, and economically. Great Chinese Famine, 1959 to 1961, one of the deadliest famines in history, estimated to have caused 30 to 45 million deaths. Holodomor. Between 5 and 10 million Ukrainians are believed to have been starved to death during the Soviet famine, 1932 to 1933, also known as Holodomor. Famines in India. Between 1870 and 1943, a series of famines claimed the lives of over 10 million people. Among them, the Bengal famine of 1943 alone caused an estimated 2 million deaths. Gaza. On March 18, 2024, the IPC warned that famine is imminent, with half of Gaza's population, 1.1 million, facing catastrophic food insecurity. Historically, famine has been an inevitable aspect of human civilization. Crop failures due to natural causes, such as droughts and floods, have consistently triggered food shortages. Human actions, such as war, economic policies, and political instability, often compounded these crises. Do you know what severe hunger feels like? Have you ever witnessed the signs of extreme food deprivation or experienced it yourself? While the experience is subjective, we will attempt to put it into words. The feeling begins as a hollow emptiness in the stomach, a deep, insistent cramp that tightens and refuses to relent. Over time, the pain sharpens. It becomes difficult to think clearly. Every thought, every action seems to orbit around the need for sustenance. There is a lightheadedness that makes the world feel slightly unreal, as though viewed through a haze. Energy drains away, leaving the limbs heavy and sluggish, while the mind flickers with irritability and despair. The mouth becomes dry, the throat tight, yet the stomach seems like a void that cannot be ignored. For some, there is even a strange sense of nausea. Severe hunger is more than physical. It seeps into the psyche, eroding patience, amplifying desperation, and leaving a person on the edge of their instincts. It is a feeling of vulnerability, of powerlessness, as though the body itself is turning into an adversary. Effects of food deprivation on the body and mind. Being hungry for a long time is an all-encompassing experience that harms the body and affects the mind. Short-term food deprivation causes decreased blood sugar levels, as glucose from food is unavailable, leading to fatigue, dizziness, and difficulty concentrating. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, is released, intensifying cravings and the sensation of hunger. When food deprivation lasts for days to weeks, the body begins to break down glycogen, stored glucose, and then fat to meet energy demands. Once fat reserves are depleted, the body starts metabolizing muscle tissue, leading to muscle weakness and wasting. Without food, the body lacks essential nutrients, leading to anemia, weakened bones, and impaired cellular functions. Continuing for weeks to months, food deprivation causes the heart, liver, and kidneys to weaken, risking organ failure. The body becomes more vulnerable to infections as it lacks the nutrients needed to maintain immune defenses. Protein and overall calorie deficiency result in symptoms such as swelling, extreme weight loss, and constant tiredness. In the starvation stage, the body exhausts its energy reserves entirely, leaving little to sustain itself. Without energy, the body struggles to regulate temperature, leading to constant coldness. Severe calorie deprivation affects cognitive abilities, causing confusion, memory loss, and potential unconsciousness. Starvation eventually leads to organ failure, the collapse of bodily functions, and death. Physical pain. International Association for the Study of Pain, IASP, defines chronic pain as pain that persists or recurs for longer than 3 months. Minimum 10% of the world population live with chronic pain, and each year, another 10% develop it. The likelihood of developing chronic pain rises with age, and it affects around 50% of older adults, aged 65 and older. Globally, around 1.71 billion people are affected by musculoskeletal conditions, which are the leading cause of disability. In 2020, low back pain, LBP, affected 619 million people. WHO. In 2019, more than 500 million individuals worldwide were living with osteoarthritis, a degenerative joint condition that causes pain, swelling, and stiffness, affecting a person's ability to move freely. WHO. Around 160 million people in the world have fibromyalgia, a medical syndrome that causes chronic, widespread pain, accompanied by fatigue, awakening unrefreshed, and cognitive symptoms. Trigeminal neuralgia is a neurological condition characterized by brief, intense facial pain. It is estimated to affect 5.5 per 100,000 people per year. That is 440,000 of the world population, 2024. Cluster headaches are excruciatingly painful headaches that occur in cyclical patterns, often causing sharp, severe pain on one side of the head, typically around the eye. Cluster headaches affect 1 in every 1,000 people, 8 million in 2024. Around 180,000 die each year due to burns. There are many more health conditions that cause severe physical pain, and we have highlighted a few to illustrate their prevalence and impact. Throughout history, humans have devised and employed profoundly painful methods of torture and execution, including crucifixion, burning at the stake, the breaking wheel, impalement, flaying, the rack, waterboarding, crushing, and boiling. These practices inflicted unimaginable suffering, often designed to prolong pain and evoke fear. Each method reflects the extremes of human cruelty and the use of intense pain as a tool for punishment, control, or intimidation. Emotional and psychological pain. The World Health Organization estimated that, in 2019, 1 in every 8 people, or 970 million people around the world, were living with a mental disorder. In a 2020 survey conducted by Gallup across 115 countries and areas, adults were questioned about 5 specific negative experiences they encountered on the day before the survey. The findings revealed that 40% of respondents reported experiencing worry, and an equal percentage reported stress. Additionally, nearly 3 in 10 adults, 29%, reported enduring physical pain for a significant part of the previous day. Approximately 1 in 4 individuals reported feelings of sadness, 27%, while 24% expressed experiencing anger during the surveyed day. The results show the widespread prevalence of these negative emotions on a global scale. Slavery. Enslaved individuals endured unimaginable physical, emotional, and psychological torment as they were forcibly separated from their families, stripped of their basic human rights, and subjected to inhumane living conditions. The cruelty extended to brutal labor, physical punishment, and the dehumanizing effects of being treated as mere property. Beyond the physical aspects, the psychological toll of being denied autonomy, dignity, and freedom left a profound impact on the enslaved. Slavery not only inflicted immediate pain and suffering, but also left lasting scars on generations, as the trauma was passed down through families. The legacy of slavery continues, as it shapes systemic inequalities and racial disparities that persist today. Based on the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, between 1514 and 1866, over 12 million African men, women, and children were subjected to the tragic transatlantic slave trade. While chattel slavery has been abolished in most parts of the world, what humans are capable of can come back later, possibly in different forms. It exists now as modern slavery. Modern slavery, a reprehensible practice persisting in the 21st century, inflicts profound suffering on countless individuals worldwide. Victims of modern slavery, whether trapped in forced labor, human trafficking, or other exploitative situations, endure conditions that strip them of their basic human rights and dignity. Subjected to coercion, violence, and deplorable living conditions, these individuals face a relentless cycle of abuse, often with little hope of escape. The suffering is not confined to physical torment but extends to psychological trauma, as victims grapple with the profound injustice of their circumstances. Modern slavery thrives in the shadows of various industries, from agriculture to manufacturing. According to ILO, 50 million people worldwide were living in modern slavery in 2021. Of these people, 28 million were in forced labor and 22 million were trapped in forced marriage. We have touched on several key factors that contribute to human suffering, though there are certainly many more that could be added. However, the points discussed here should be sufficient to convey the seriousness of the situation. You might feel that your life isn't all that difficult, and perhaps, in comparison, it isn't. However, there is an overwhelming number of people facing immense hardships every day. What makes their situation even more heartbreaking is that many of them don't know if or when their struggles will end. Animal suffering. In this section, we will discuss animal consciousness, pain experience in animals, and the extent of pain they endure. Animal consciousness. Consciousness is awareness of internal states and external stimuli. Let's consider sound as an example to illustrate conscious experience. As conscious beings, when we hear a sound, we don't just detect the sound, we feel it. This sensation, combined with our awareness of it, is what makes the experience conscious. Self-awareness is the awareness about one's self, own feelings, and thoughts. Objective self-awareness refers to the ability of a being to observe itself as an entity distinct from others and its surroundings. It is the capacity to view oneself from an external perspective as an object of reflection or scrutiny. Objective self-awareness allows a being to not only exist, but to know they exist as a subject among objects, as part of a larger, interconnected world. It is the bridge between simply experiencing life and understanding one's place within it. It often includes the recognition of traits, behaviors, limitations, and even one's existence in relation to others and the environment. This process is key to understanding one's role in the world, forming a personal identity, and aligning actions with external standards or expectations. Consciousness is inherently subjective. Only the individuals experiencing it have direct access to their conscious thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. This subjectivity creates a major challenge in objectively assessing consciousness, particularly in animals. As a result, we must rely on indirect indicators, such as behavior, neural activity, and physiological responses, to evaluate animal consciousness. Evidence indicates that certain animals exhibit varying levels of self-awareness. In this section, we explore such evidence of consciousness and self-awareness in animals. Mirror test. Some animals, including great apes, elephants, magpies, have passed the mirror test, which indicates self-awareness. This test involves recognizing oneself in a mirror, suggesting an understanding of self. Theory of mind is the cognitive ability to understand that others have their own different minds. It is the understanding that other individuals have different beliefs, intentions, desires, and plans from our own. There is significant evidence suggesting that animals, especially highly intelligent species like great apes, corvids, and dolphins, possess a form of theory of mind. Corvids, particularly crows and ravens, have shown remarkable cognitive abilities that hint at a form of theory of mind. These birds often cache, hide, food, and they exhibit behavior suggesting they are aware that other birds might be watching them. If a crow notices another crow observing them while hiding food, they will often return later to move the food to a new location when they are not observed, showing an understanding that the other bird might remember where the food is and steal it. This implies that crows can infer the intentions or knowledge of others. Memory. Animals are capable of remembering things and using previously known facts later, a key aspect of their intelligence and survival strategies. This ability is seen across a wide range of species, from mammals to birds, and even some fish and insects. Learning. Animals can learn from their experiences and adjust their decisions based on experience. This is especially evident in species that exhibit complex behaviors, such as certain birds that use trial and error to learn how to use tools or solve problems to obtain food. Social animals, such as primates and some bird species, make decisions based on their interactions with others. Social hierarchies, cooperation, and communication play significant roles in their decision-making processes. For example, decisions about group movements or resource allocation often involve social dynamics. Tool use. Certain animals exhibit tool use, a behavior once thought to be exclusive to humans. For instance, chimpanzees use sticks to extract insects from termite mounds. Problem-solving skills are also observed in animals, showcasing their ability to make decisions in response to changing circumstances. Spatial planning. Animals engage in spatial planning to navigate their surroundings efficiently. This includes planning routes to find food, avoid predators, or locate mates. Empathy. Social animals, such as primates, elephants, dolphins, and certain canines, often exhibit behaviors that suggest a capacity for empathy. They form strong social bonds and show concern for the well-being of others within their social groups. Some animals are capable of perceiving and responding to the pain of others. This is evident in behaviors like vocalizations or changes in behavior when witnessing another individual in distress. Studies on primates and other social animals have documented instances of consolation and reconciliation. After a conflict, individuals may offer gestures of comfort or engage in affiliative behaviors to repair social bonds. There are instances of empathy extending beyond the boundaries of the same species. For example, dogs have been known to show empathy towards humans and other animals, responding to distress signals and offering comfort. Altruism, or selfless behavior that benefits others, is seen in various animals. For example, some primates have been observed assisting injured or disabled group members, even if it means putting themselves at risk. Dolphins are known to support sick or injured pod members by helping them stay afloat and breathe. Animals demonstrate complex behaviors, problem-solving skills, emotions, and social interactions. Many animal species can use tools, plan, and make decisions that require complex thought processes, logic, and accessing information from the memories of past experiences. Considering the points mentioned earlier, I feel certain that many animal species possess self-awareness. They understand the distinction between their own self and others. They can think, feel, and understand. Since consciousness is subjective, It is important to remember that when animals do not fit within our understanding of consciousness, it does not necessarily mean they lack consciousness. Rather, it may simply highlight the limitations of our perspective. An anthropocentric view assumes that human consciousness is the standard, often leading us to overlook or misinterpret signs of consciousness in animals whose behaviors and experiences differ from ours. Criticism of animal consciousness sometimes comes from concerns that anthropomorphism, attributing human traits, emotions, or consciousness to animals, leads to biased or inaccurate interpretations. While recognizing biases allows for a broader and potentially more accurate interpretation of animal consciousness, in this context, this concern is overstated. Evidence for the likelihood of evolutionary continuity in consciousness, neuroscientific findings on similar brain structures, overlapping cognitive abilities between humans and animals, and the observation of complex behaviors all suggest that animals, like humans, possess consciousness. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness and the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness demonstrate scientific consensus on animal consciousness. Animals feel pain. Humans share a common descent with other animals. Humans would not be unique in feeling pain given the physiological and genetic similarities. Physiological responses. Animals show physiological responses to injury and distress, such as increased heart rate, breathing, and cortisol levels, similar to how humans react to pain. Behavioral changes. Animals exhibit behavioral changes when injured, often attempting to escape, vocalizing in distress, or showing signs of fear and anxiety. We see it in their flinches and yelps, their licked wounds and guarded postures. We see it in their altered behavior, the loss of appetite and withdrawal from social interaction. These are not mere reflexes, but expressions of suffering. Similar nervous system. Their nervous systems, similar in structure and function to our own, possess the same pain receptors and transmit pain signals through the same pathways. Neurons in both humans and animals have the same fundamental components: dendrites, receiving input, a cell body, soma, and an axon, sending signals. This shared structure allows neurons across species to perform similar tasks, such as transmitting information via electrical and chemical signals. Neurochemical similarities. Animals release neurotransmitters and hormones similar to those of humans when experiencing pain, such as endorphins and adrenaline. Studies show that animals, like humans, release stress hormones and opioids in response to pain. They avoid situations that previously caused them harm, demonstrating a memory of pain and its consequences. Similar brain regions. Human and animal brains share many structural similarities, as they have homologous regions that perform comparable functions, such as the cerebrum for higher processing, the cerebellum for coordination, and the brainstem for basic survival functions. Both human and animal brains are also organized in layers and contain similar cell types, like neurons and glial cells. Genetic similarities. Homologous genes are genes shared between different species that originated from a common ancestor. Homologous genes demonstrate the evolutionary connections between humans and other species. These genes can retain similar functions across species or adapt to serve new purposes over evolutionary time. Chimpanzees share approximately 98 to 99% of their DNA with us. This high degree of genetic similarity means that most of our genes are homologous. As an example, the SCN9A gene is shared by mammals, e.g., mice, rats, cats, dogs, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and even some invertebrates. It plays a vital role in the transmission of pain signals. Mutation in this gene can cause a complete lack of pain sensation or hypersensitivity to pain. As we have seen, animals share pain mechanisms with humans, have similar physiological responses to pain, and express the same type of behavior change in response to painful experiences. Universality of animal suffering. In today's world, humans are rarely preyed upon by larger predators. We can buy the food we need and access medical treatments for most diseases. But for wild animals, life remains a constant struggle against hunger, predators, and illness. This difference can make it difficult for modern humans to relate to the lives of animals. I encourage you to read with empathy as we discuss the hardships the animals endure. Death. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reports that the number of land animals slaughtered for meat has steadily increased over the past 60 years. In 2022 alone, this figure reached a staggering 83 billion worldwide. A significant number of these animals are not stunned or made unconscious before killing. Stunning is not required before or during slaughter in many countries. Before being killed in slaughterhouses, animals are often subjected to long, arduous journeys in cramped and highly stressful conditions. Animals may be handled roughly or aggressively, which can cause physical injuries, dehydration, and psychological distress to them. Stunning methods can be ineffective or poorly applied, leading to pain and suffering. Most deaths in the wild occur due to predation or disease. Most of the time, these deaths are very painful. High juvenile mortality is a well-documented phenomenon in many animal species, especially among those with large offspring numbers. Despite these high birth rates, populations remain stable because only a small percentage of juveniles survive to adulthood, balancing reproduction with mortality. This is particularly common in species following a type 3 survivorship curve, where most individuals die young due to predation, competition, or environmental hazards. Diseases. Diseases cause pain and lingering suffering. Furthermore, those who are weak, whether due to disease, starvation, or injuries from fights, become easy targets for predators. Disease outbreaks, episodic, happen among the animals. Infectious diseases like avian influenza, bird flu, African swine fever, rabies, and many more infect millions. Animals suffer from parasitic, bacterial, environmental, and nutritional diseases. As an example, foot and mouth disease, FMD, is estimated to affect 77% of the world's livestock population. Hunger. Hunger is a discomfort that animals feel at regular intervals. A readily available meal is rare in the wild. Behavioral and physiological changes in animals during food deprivation indicate that animals, much like humans, experience hunger. Animals have similar hormonal systems that regulate hunger. For instance, hormones like ghrelin increase before meals to stimulate hunger, while leptin signals satiety after eating. These mechanisms are found across many species, including mammals, birds, rodents, reptiles, and fishes. Moreover, hunger makes wild animals venture for food. Animals risk getting attacked, killed, or eaten by other animals while they are out for food. Carnivores risk getting injured while hunting. Sometimes they have to starve due to lack of food. Farmed animals are forced to live in restricted areas that limit their ability to seek food independently. If farm owners fail to provide them with adequate food, the animals are left hungry. During natural disasters, food shortages, or economic hardship, farmed animals are especially vulnerable to hunger. Fights. Fights result in injuries for both parties. Fights occur among the members of their own species as they compete for food and partners for reproduction. Fights also happen to exert and establish dominance. Making offspring is the way for the survival of the copies of their genes. They will take extraordinary risks to have that opportunity. Feeling the urge to find a mating partner would be naturally strong. It causes stress and leads to fights among competing males. Environmental changes, temperature changes by seasons, by day and night. Animals are adapted to one particular temperature range. They experience great discomfort and hardship during extreme temperatures. Heavy rainfall, storms, floods, wildfires, and other natural disasters kill, injure, and displace animals. These happen regularly. Emotional and psychological suffering. Animals feel emotional and psychological pain, for example, stress, anxiety, fear, trauma. Some of them mourn their dead. Industrial farming. According to the Sentience Institute, 31 billion land animals are being farmed globally at any given time. In industrial farming, animals are kept in small, confined spaces, which is at least uncomfortable for most animals. They have to live in an environment that is not their natural habitat. The food they are given is not what they would eat in the wild. In most cases, they live miserable lives. Their lives serve the purpose of producing food or being food for humans. Eventually, they will be killed. All of these, including captivity, exploitation, and slaughter, are done without their consent. Hunting. The animals that are left wounded but not killed go through prolonged, painful deaths. Around 6 million deer are harvested every year in the US and Canada combined. Other animals that are hunted often include wild turkeys, black bears, and elk, with around 4,300,000 and 200,000 harvested every year respectively. Cruelty. Even in today's world, cruel behavior toward animals is pretty commonplace. Sometimes, intelligent beings inflict pain intentionally for no apparent reason other than contempt or enjoyment. Population fluctuations in wild animals are a clear indicator of animal suffering in the wild. The population of many animal species fluctuates due to reasons such as resource availability, intraspecific competition, predator-prey dynamics, disease outbreaks, and environmental factors like natural disasters and climate change. When the population of an animal species is not kept in check by predation or diseases, the population grows until competition for food and other resources becomes a limiting factor, resulting in starvation, conflict, and suffering. In the wild, there is rarely a happy ending. We could certainly include more information, but the facts presented clearly illustrate the pain and suffering that animal species across the world endure. These points should be enough to convey the gravity of their condition, making it evident that the situation demands our attention. Chapter 2. Total Extinction. Almost all sentient beings we know feel pain and suffer. Non-existent beings do not feel anything. By preventing future beings from coming into existence, we can spare them from suffering. In the future, technologies will be available that can prevent reproduction without causing physical harm. It would be possible to make all sentient species go extinct gradually. Suffering will end after all the existing sentient beings die naturally, without leaving any offspring. In this chapter, we will explore ideas regarding whether total extinction is the right choice, whether we have the right to make such a consequential choice for other species, and whether we should take the burden onto ourselves. Total extinction deprives future potential beings of their consciousness, feelings, or happiness. Would it be wrong to deny them their lives and experiences? Let's find out. Would you choose unbearable pain for one individual? Let's imagine a being that had no say in its birth, and it endured intense pain without asking for it, a truly unfortunate circumstance. Now, suppose we had the ability to prevent this being from coming into existence. Consider another scenario in which we bring 100 individuals into existence. 99 of them experience happy lives, but one endures unbearable suffering throughout their life. As in real life, it is uncertain who will be the sufferer. Imagine having the following two options, to bring either all or none of them into existence. In my view, in this case, we should prevent this one individual's extreme pain and suffering, even if doing so means preventing all 100 individuals from existing. None of the 100 individuals will miss anything as they are never born. Happiness and other desirable experiences cannot compensate for the pain and suffering. These feelings are nice to have, but in most cases, the sentient being in pain cannot just choose not to feel pain. Thus, it would not be right to choose one being's suffering so that many others can have a happy life. In our hypothetical scenario, only one individual suffered. The reality, however, is far graver. In real life, trillions of sentient beings are destined to struggle for sustenance and endure extreme pain and prolonged suffering. No one deserves to suffer. Pleasure, often a fleeting companion, can be embraced or dismissed at will. We can choose to enjoy a moment of happiness, or almost always, we can turn away from it, opting for detachment or restraint. In contrast, pain operates under a different set of rules. We cannot simply choose not to feel pain. It intrudes upon our lives uninvited, often striking with an intensity that demands our attention. Unlike pleasure, which we can sidestep or ignore, pain seeps into our existence, leaving us no choice but to confront it. Intense pain, in particular, can leave us feeling powerless and overwhelmed. The unavoidable and unbearable nature of pain is evident in the context of torture, where sustained agony breaks even the strongest will, driving people to say or do anything to end the torment. Extreme pain exerts absolute control, stripping away autonomy and silencing reason. Pain compliance, the use of painful stimuli to control or direct an organism, also demonstrates our powerlessness against pain. If we choose to bring sentient beings into existence, they will feel both pleasure and pain. A joyful life is good. Non-existence is neutral, neither good nor bad, while a life filled predominantly with suffering is bad. To progress this argument, we can say that bringing lives into existence who will enjoy a happy life is morally acceptable. Choosing not to create life is neutral, as the absence of a recipient of harm or benefit removes the need for moral consideration. Bringing conscious beings into existence who will suffer throughout their life is wrong. Each year, more than 700,000 people commit suicide. These individuals choose to end their existence as sentient beings to avoid experiencing further pain and suffering. They have overridden their natural instinct of survival and possibly accepted intense pain for one last time to free themselves from the burden of life. According to the American Psychological Association, more than 20% of teens have seriously considered suicide. No one deserves to suffer so that some others can have pleasure. Thus, if bringing lives into existence risks suffering and pain, we should rather choose non-existence, since non-existence does no harm to anyone. Here, concerns about depriving prospective lives of pleasure or any kind of experience are unfounded because these lives do not exist, and therefore no one is harmed or deprived. On a related note, we have no inherent obligation or responsibility to produce sentient beings or replicate their genetic code. Besides, if brought into existence, these lives have the potential to further procreate and bring more lives. The chain continues and branches out. Some of those descendants will certainly have undesirable lives. Acknowledgement. The reasoning here is influenced by David Benatar's asymmetry argument. While the ideas presented are my articulation, they are indebted to his foundational framework. Consent requirement. Have you ever done something you thought was kind for someone else, only to find out they didn't like it? This highlights the importance of prior consent, which is not taken from the offspring before they are brought into existence. This is especially relevant for those who will have an undesirable life. Implied consent does not apply to matters of great consequences. I understand the practical challenge of obtaining prior consent before the child was born. However, that does not absolve you from the responsibility of your choice. Is it possible to harm the non-existent? Can we justify choices that prevent beings from coming into existence naturally, as organisms procreate, driven by biological compulsion? Is it possible to harm beings that do not exist? In this book, we invite readers to consider ending suffering through the gradual extinction of species. This section examines the moral implications of causing such extinction. Harming a being that will never exist is impossible because harm requires a recipient, and a non-existing being, by definition, has no existence to experience harm. Whether physical, emotional, or otherwise, harm can only be inflicted on someone who exists in reality. Harming a being that will exist in the future, but does not yet exist, is possible. Our actions today can create conditions that negatively impact their future well-being, health, or opportunities. Choices we make now can set consequences in motion that ultimately harm those who come into existence later. Should we consider lives that will not come into existence due to our choice as hypothetical beings that will never exist or as beings deprived of their existence? First, one needs to exist to be considered as a being. If they never exist, they cannot feel deprived. Second, there are countless hypothetical beings. We do not concern ourselves with an infinite number of hypothetical beings. Additionally, those of us who exist may feel sad for the unborn, but our feelings are irrelevant here. Should the natural existence of species be left untouched? Whether something is natural or not does not determine its desirability or ethical validity. I believe our choices should reflect our concern for the well-being of the individual. Moreover, inertia, the tendency of things to remain in the state they are, is natural. Therefore, leaving non-existent beings as they are aligns with the natural state, and choosing non-existence does not deviate from nature. Value of conscious existence. Is the existence of the self, a thinking, feeling entity, preferable to non-existence, once we take into account evolutionary drives and optimism bias? We prefer our existence over non-existence for various reasons. Evolutionary drives, the pursuit of desirable experiences, and a deep-seated fear of the unknown, particularly of death. But even without these factors, we might still choose to exist. There is a profoundness in the experience itself, a certain, inexplicable sense of aliveness that many would argue is worth holding on to, beyond any practical or emotional motivations. Now, would you trade the sufferings of countless lives for the experience of self? I wouldn't. Total extinction prevents future suffering, but does not deprive anyone of the experience of the self. You might ask, how? The lives that would not exist cannot be harmed. One individual's feelings. What do you gain from life as an individual? Fleeting moments of pleasure? One does not feel someone else's pleasure. Thus, for one individual, the cost of non-existence is that individual's potential desirable feelings. Are these brief, desirable feelings of one individual enough to justify all the sufferings of innumerable lives? Could it really be that difficult to step away from what pleases us? We are not asking anyone to give up anything, though. Our concern in this book is about preventing suffering for the sentient beings of the future, and we are just inviting you to reconsider the impact of choices that bring lives into existence. In this section, we will uncover the roots of feelings and question whether the pursuit of desirable experiences is worth the suffering. The feelings you experience are produced by your body and experienced with the brain. You, as a conscious being, reside in that body, a vessel created not for you, but for your genes. Like your body, your consciousness is also a tool for your genes. You serve their purposes, to ensure their survival and to create their next copy. Your body grew from a single zygote by utilizing instructions encoded in your genes. The main objective of your genetic code is simple: to create copies of itself and to ensure that those copies survive long enough to continue the process of replication. Your brain, your nervous system, your desires, and your feelings push you toward your gene's goal: copy, survive, copy. But what is your objective? Is it to extensively serve the blind, mindless agenda of your genetic code? To follow the feelings programmed into you by forces indifferent to your well-being? Or would you choose to question, to decide, and perhaps to rebel? You, the conscious being within a complex biological machine, feel as though you control your body, yet it is your genes that carry instructions for its operation. In this shared occupation of the body, both you and your genes get something in return. You get to feel, they get to survive, and leave their copy on future generations. As a conscious being, your feelings are important to you, but your genetic code cannot care about your feelings. Through the natural process of evolution, genetic codes adapt to survive and replicate. This process completely disregards justice or well-being. Their indifference toward fairness is reflected in the struggles and suffering we witness in the world around us. So, how do you feel? Are you a guest in your body that gives you pleasant experiences? Or are you a prisoner, chained to the genetic demands of survival and reproduction? Do you think you've got a fair deal in this shared existence? Or simply a deal you had no choice but to accept? In the first chapter, The Problem of Suffering, we have explored the prevalence of suffering. In the next section, we will discuss happiness and question whether all the happiness outweighs all the suffering. Happiness. Can pleasure compensate for pain? Should we consider the amount of happiness while choosing extinction because of the amount of pain and suffering? Are there fundamental differences between pleasure and pain? We are not designed to be happy. From the evolutionary standpoint, happiness is designed to be a motivator, not to be a permanent state. If we were always perfectly content, we would have little incentive to seek out resources, relationships, or opportunities for growth. Sensory pleasure, which refers to the positive feelings experienced through our senses, such as the taste of food, is directly linked to survival or reproduction. The pursuit of these pleasures often requires overcoming physical, environmental, or social challenges. For both humans and animals, the complexity of obtaining food, finding mates, forming social bonds, and enjoying comfort or physical well-being reflects the broader struggle for survival. The conditions required to experience sensory pleasures are not easily met, making these experiences often elusive in the harsh realities of life. Moreover, discomfort often precedes satisfaction. While pleasure fades away quickly, discomfort persists until it is resolved. Feelings like hunger create a discomfort that, once satisfied, we feel happy. The brain is wired to ease discomfort, rather than to generate lasting happiness. What we perceive as pleasure is rooted in the drive to escape an undesirable or uncomfortable state. Physical discomfort relief, pleasure and comfort from eating, drinking, or resting, often come as a response to hunger, thirst, or fatigue. These basic drives create discomfort, which we alleviate by seeking relief in food, water, or rest. Relief from desire or craving. Cravings, whether for food, material goods, or achievements, create tension or dissatisfaction in the mind. The act of fulfilling a craving, eating something desirable, buying something new, or reaching a goal, provides a sense of pleasure largely because it alleviates this underlying feeling of lack or desire. Emotional and mental relief. Many activities we find pleasurable, like socializing, watching entertainment, or using social media, are responses to emotional discomfort such as boredom, loneliness, or stress. An abundance of pleasure for some humans is an anomaly. What we see in the media and on social media, carefully crafted portrayals of celebrities, the wealthy, successful people, or those pretending to live rich, successful, or happy lives, does not reflect the reality of most people's experiences. Despite the difficulty of measuring and comparing the amount of happiness and suffering in the world, evidence and arguments presented above and in the previous chapter make it clear that, collectively, the amount of pain and suffering sentient beings experience far outweighs their total happiness. Besides, the suffering of one cannot be erased by the happiness of another. A child's laughter does not soothe the agony of a starving parent. A joyful existence cannot undo the torment of a life lived in despair. Each sentient being experiences their reality in isolation. Even if the collective balance sheet of happiness and suffering leaned in favor of joy, it would do nothing to ease the suffering of those condemned to endure misery. Their pain is real, immediate, and absolute, regardless of how much happiness might exist elsewhere. The crucial difference between pleasure and pain lies in our ability to avoid them. We cannot simply choose not to feel pain, but we can almost always forego pleasure at will. This distinction was discussed in detail in the "No One Deserves to Suffer" section above. When we acknowledge this difference, it becomes less about weighing happiness against suffering and more about considering whether it is ethical to force others into this equation at all. Is it fair to gamble with the well-being of potential lives for the chance of creating fleeting happiness? The potential for joy, no matter how great, does not erase the certainty of suffering that many will endure. Utopia, the alternative examined. In this book, utopia refers to a society in which suffering is minimal and avoidable at will. Based on the points mentioned in earlier sections, I came to the understanding that the only acceptable alternative to total extinction is the utopia that either continues forever or lasts until a future total extinction event, provided that this utopia is materialized before total extinction becomes realizable. While utopian visions of the future often imagine a world free from poverty, conflict, and many of today's hardships, they overlook some fundamental truths about the nature of human existence. Progress is not permanent. Scarcity, if solved, can come back. History has shown that civilizations can rise to great heights, only to fall back into periods of scarcity and decline. Whether due to resource depletion, environmental changes, economic collapse, or social unrest, the advances we make are never guaranteed to last forever. Human beings hold diverse values, beliefs, and desires. Different groups and cultures have varying perspectives on what an ideal society should look like. One person's vision of utopia can be another's dystopia. These conflicting ideals make it nearly impossible to establish a universally accepted model of perfection without marginalizing certain groups. The real danger lies in how readily some groups are willing to sacrifice others' freedoms in pursuit of their vision of a perfect society. Human tendencies toward greed, conflict, and short-term thinking obstruct the pursuit of equitable and sustainable solutions. Humans regularly exploit others for self-interest, inflicting pain and suffering, a pattern that shows no signs of stopping. And some people go further, hurting others simply because they enjoy it. Even if humans were to genetically alter themselves to become more egalitarian, certain deeply ingrained primal traits, selfishness, egocentrism, power hunger, and aggression, would persist. Technological advancements, while promising, could exacerbate inequality or be misused for authoritarian purposes. With the accumulation of knowledge and technology, unimaginable power concentrates in the hands of a select few, and this imbalance will only keep growing. The unpredictability of global events, coupled with the challenge of overcoming systemic issues like corruption, competition for resources, and cultural divides, make such an ideal future nearly impossible to achieve. Even the most carefully planned utopias can have unintended consequences. Well-intentioned policies may lead to unforeseen problems, requiring constant adaptation and adjustment. Even in a utopia, the unavoidable truths of life remain: death, decay, and psychological suffering. No matter how advanced a society becomes, it cannot eliminate existential anxieties or the inherent fragility of the human condition. Physical pain might be reduced, but emotional and psychological anguish cannot be fully eradicated. Humans, by nature, face a range of emotions like sadness, anxiety, boredom, and grief. These forms of suffering are intrinsic to us and would persist in any future society, utopian or not. The possibility of a future utopia cannot justify bringing new lives into existence. The risk of suffering, no matter how small, outweighs any potential benefits of existence. A utopia would not provide a morally sound reason to create life, as the non-existent are not deprived of happiness or pleasure. Instead, they are spared the potential for suffering. In essence, the dream of a utopian future is not sufficient to justify the ethical gamble of bringing new beings into existence. The promise of a better world does not eliminate the core problem that life, in any form, inherently includes suffering, often profound, inescapable, and unnecessary. Therefore, it is more ethical to avoid creating life altogether than to gamble on the unrealistic promise of a utopian future. Optimism bias and the allure of utopia. Optimism bias is defined as the difference between a person's expectation and the outcome that follows. If expectations are better than reality, the bias is optimistic. Talishara. How realistic is the hope for a utopia? Does that hope arise from our optimism bias? From the discussion about utopia in the previous section, we can conclude that optimism surrounding a utopian future is deeply flawed and, in many ways, naive. Optimism about a utopian future assumes that the moral and social progress necessary for such a world is achievable. Yet, human history demonstrates that progress is often fragile and reversible. Technological and social advances have not eliminated war, exploitation, or inequality. Rather, they have created new forms of suffering, for example, technological unemployment, mass surveillance, environmental degradation. Even if a utopia could be built, it would not remain stable or truly egalitarian in the long term, given humanity's track record of corruption, greed, and conflict. In attempting to create a utopian society, overly ambitious leaders and their followers risk paving the way for a dystopia that marginalizes certain groups, overlooks diverse human needs, and erodes individual freedoms. Moral rights to choose for other species. Let's examine whether we have moral rights to choose extinction for species that cannot communicate with humans. Why should you be the one to decide what's best for them? What gives you that authority? Natural selection optimizes for survival, not for the reduction of suffering. Organisms, driven by their instincts for survival, will continue to strive for life, even in the face of immense suffering. What matters is each individual's well-being, not preferences pre-made by blind processes like evolution. Most species lack the ability to communicate with us or to consider committing suicide to end their own suffering, or to hold abstract and complex thoughts such as total extinction to be a way to end all suffering. Therefore, it can be argued that we, the more intelligent species, have the moral rights, and perhaps even an obligation, to decide for them. Thus, yes, I believe I can make decisions on behalf of other sentient beings, having their best interest in mind, if they cannot do it themselves. The following point is also worth mentioning here. For the sake of argument, if we consider animals are neither sentient, conscious, nor self-aware, meaning they do not experience pain, then, in that context, their extinction would not hold ethical significance. Omission bias and moral obligation. The omission bias refers to our tendency to judge harmful actions as worse than harmful inactions, even if they result in similar consequences. Are we morally obligated to act if we have the ability to end or significantly reduce suffering? Should we choose total extinction to eliminate suffering altogether? I would answer yes, based on the facts, evidence, and arguments presented earlier in this book. The journey toward total extinction. In the future, technologies will be available that can render organisms incapable of producing offspring. For example, CRISPR-Cas9 can be used to modify germinal cells to prevent reproduction while leaving somatic cells unaffected. If we gradually apply this to all members of all species, these species would eventually go extinct. My expectation is that, by then, humanity would choose voluntary extinction for themselves. Suffering ends after the last generation of sentient beings dies, leaving no offspring. This is just one example of how we can achieve total extinction. Future technologies may offer even more appealing solutions. On that journey, we can work to reduce suffering for humans and animals. The extinction event need not be one moment in history or one decisive action, but rather a work in progress toward that final goal. Final thoughts. The amount of suffering in the world is immense. We can reduce and end suffering through gradual extinction of species. I am hopeful that future generations, with a deeper understanding of both suffering and compassion, will reach a consensus and prevent the sufferings of beings who never asked to be born. Perhaps humanity's greatest legacy would not be what we create, but the suffering we choose to prevent. Key takeaways. 1. Many animals are sentient beings. 2. Both humans and animals experience unbearable suffering. 3. Suffering of even a single individual cannot be ethically justified. 4. Pain cannot simply be avoided by choice. 5. No harm can be done to the non-existent. 6. Utopia is unattainable. 7. Nothing justifies the deliberate perpetuation of suffering. 8. Extinction of all species could eliminate all suffering. 9. Life creation can be prevented with genetic modifications. 10. The ethical choice is the one that minimizes suffering.